the slave chains for the hands, and the back chains, and the head chains where they pull their heads back behind them. Also the cruel, critical, unbelievable things right here in this United States.
What happens is that as the anti-slavery struggle heats up, the Vermont legislature will pass law after law that attacks the National Fugitive Slave Act, that makes it illegal to capture a slave in this state or to take them out of state.
And it became pretty well known that Vermont did not permit slavery. Word traveled pretty fast.
Now, be careful, because we're going to go into the old section of the house. And when you pass through this doorway, you do not want to lose your camera or your head. We have letters documenting fugitives who were here. Every single one of these letters says the same thing. Vermont is a safe haven.
There's a tide of more and more runaways and fugitives coming into Vermont from outside the state, and this becomes known as the Underground Railroad.
Rowland Thomas and Rachel Gilpin Robinson were the heads of household here. They were devout Quakers, and they were radical abolitionists.
Not only do we know that the slaves were harbored, but we also know that they worked in the fields, on the farm, and were paid for it.
These were people who had already made that first really horrible, perilous journey out of the South. You risked your life in order to gain freedom, and many people didn't succeed. They were recaptured.
Mostly they are young men. They are concerned and frightened, certainly, but they are also formidable people. Rowland Robinson is a Quaker boy. The first weapons that this Quaker boy sees growing up are Bowie knives and Colt revolvers in the belts of fugitive slaves who are passing through.
I may as well tell the truth. I was frightened to take a long journey. I did not know the country. I did know that if my master caught me and brought me back, I should get scourged nearly to death. I was always on the lookout for a fair chance of escaping, and treasured up in my memory such scraps of information as I could draw out of the people that came to the plantation. I have no knowledge of distance or direction. I know that Pennsylvania is a free state, but I know not where its soil begins or where that of Maryland ends. But the hour was now come, and the man must act and be free or remain a slave forever. Hope, fear, dread, terror, love, sorrow, and deep melancholy were mingled in my mind together. I had but 4 pieces of clothing about my person. I was a starving fugitive, without home or friends. A reward offered for my person in the public papers. Pursued by cruel manhunters. I went up the northern canal into one of the New England states. When I reached Vermont, I found the people very hospitable and kind. They seemed opposed to slavery, so I told them I was a runaway slave. I hired myself to a firm in Sudbury. After I'd been in Sudbury some time, the neighboring farmers told me that I had hired myself for much less money than I ought. I mentioned it to my employers, who were very angry about it. I was advised to leave by some of the people around, who thought the gentleman I was with would write to my former master, informing him where I was, and obtain the reward fixed upon me. Fearing I should be taken, I immediately left and went into the town of Ludlow, where I met with a kind friend. I was then conducted into a safe retreat, where there was a bed provided for me, into which I got and soon fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I awoke, and finding myself in a strange place, became alarmed. It was a clear starlight night, and I could see the walls of my room, and the curtains all of a dazzling whiteness around me. I felt so singularly happy. At last I became alive to the truth, that I was in a friend's house, and that I really was free and safe.
You hear these words, and they're so not that legendary Underground Railroad where the slaves are packages that white people pick up and hand to each other. These are where they're people with no agency, no courage, no fortitude.
I wanted to know the route that they took.
No, they didn't. The Underground Railroad is a metaphor. Any Underground Railroad book you read will have a map, and it'll show these arrows going up from the south into the north. And it's as though the fugitive just had to go like this. Okay, I'm on the Underground Railroad now. Whoosh! You read the narratives, they went in a circle 5 times. There was no whooshing about it.
I am glad to say also that numbers of my colored brethren now escape from slavery. They suffer many privations in their attempts to reach the free states. They subsist only on such wild fruit as they can gather, and as they are often very long on their way, they reach the free states almost like skeletons.
There was no route. It wasn't like you bought a ticket, and unless you literally were going on the railroad or on a ship, which people did. Frederick Douglass got on a train, and he did just buy a ticket. But people were walking in the woods. There was like 1,000 steps.
They hide themselves during the day in the woods and swamps. At night, they travel, crossing rivers by swimming or by boats they may chance to meet with, and passing over hills and meadows which they do not know.
What happened is that African Americans passed through Vermont, some of them on itineraries that were developed by white abolitionists, but many on their own. Some of them are going along somewhat of a network of safe houses. Others are relying on the random acts of kindness of strangers.
In these dangerous journeys, they are guided by the North Star, for they only know that the land of freedom is in the north.
Some people really oversimplify Vermont's history, because at the very same time that you had an Underground Railroad and very well-meaning progressive anti-slavery abolitionist people, you have this other flip side of the anti-slavery movement, the Vermont Colonization Society, which was popular in Vermont. The VCS was a local branch where they were dedicated to sending black people out of the United States.
The idea was we're going to ship free blacks to Africa, back home. They didn't think of that as home. They were 3-generation, 4-generation Americans. They didn't want to go back to Africa.
In other words, people that supported the VCS, they were anti-slavery, but they were also anti-black, which was not, please don't think this was peculiar to Vermont. This was a very common trend in the United States among anti-slavery people, okay?
It was very, very easy to be anti-slavery and be completely racist. In fact, the base reason why slavery persisted so long in this country was because what are we going to do with them after they're free?
Abolitionists is another story, though. Abolitionists were the more radical fringe, and they believed in the total equality of people regardless of color, regardless of gender.
Radical abolition, as put forth by William Lloyd Garrison starting in the early 1830s, it's basically Christian. These were radical Christians. They believed that slavery was a sin.
The abolitionists were all over Vermont. William Lloyd Garrison is here. Frederick Douglass comes here.
Little towns, Jamaica, Vermont had an abolition society with 200 people in it.
They weren't always welcomed well. Frederick Douglass gets insulted up in Ferrisburg, and one abolitionist gets snowballed in Montpelier.
People thought they were going to destroy the country, and they would have happily destroyed the country if it would have ended slavery. I mean, William Lloyd Garrison had been calling for no union with slaveholders since the 1830s.